So moving on to the third form of communication, which is sort of visual. When I say visual, I don't mean painting or any real art form, because for one reason or another, I've never been any good or particularly interested in
Mm.
trying to either uh, copy or enhance or represent the world through those sorts of media. The only visual form I use, obviously, is the camera, because that does the capturing work for you, which I can't do accurately without a lot of extra hard work, which I'm not prepared to do. And therefore, um, not photography even, because I take photographs, but they're not very interesting. And not technically film work, because I'm not trained or particularly good at filming. But because I want to communicate and capture, particularly other cultures and other parts of the world or interviews, I am good enough. And indeed, I have some of the virtues of not being trained, because a number of my friends who were trained in film school and so on don't make very good films, because they follow all sorts of rules which are either out of date or they're too strict. For example, that you should have a tripod when you're interviewing someone, or a still thing, or you should have sound microphones to enhance, or you should have proper lighting, um, or you should never let, if you're filming something, never let sort of reality intrude. In other words, people get in front of the camera or anything like that. My filming very early on took the view that I took with fishing, which was the fishing book says, have this array of flies and do this and so on. They had to fill the book up with rules and suggestions. My view was that you have the absolute bare simplicity of a fishing rod, 3 or 4 flies which you trust and know work well, and then you go and fish. And the more that your fly is on the water, the more likely you are to catch fish if you're spending your time fiddling around thinking about the rules. So basically, when I filmed in Nepal and elsewhere, I did this minimally. And when I interview, I do this minimally. And likewise, editing. Um, I could spend many hours editing, but again, I feel, and I discovered, and many filmmakers come to this conclusion in the end, that the more you have the warts and all the, I mean, as long as it's not sort of that you've forgotten to turn off the camera and it's just panning across the ground, a lot of the interruptions and people walking across and all the rest of it adds naturalness. And the handheld cameras increasingly became popular. So my films became more realistic because people could see I wasn't fiddling with them in the editorial phase. So filming has been important in communicating to a certain extent, and also about learning, as I mentioned elsewhere. But it's become increasingly important in our visual age, because if you, we all know that young people now absorb not only 70% through their eyes as they did before, but much of their knowledge of the world and the things they want to spend their time with are on the screens. And therefore, if you have a large supply of good films and photographs as well as texts, you can uh, talk to people in a way which you wouldn't be able to do if you were writing. And that,
Have you ever made a film and then you've gone back and looked at it and you've learned something that you hadn't noticed before, but you captured it on film, even at the time you didn't know?
oh yes, often. I mean, I think I did actually give this example, but it's the only one that springs to mind, which is how humans learn to lie. Did I tell you the story of how I
No,
learned?
no, you did. No.
Um, well, many people say that the thing humans distinguish humans from animals is that we know how to lie, um, which is, of course, is untrue, because animals know how to lie too. But we are good at it. We're very social animals, and therefore a lot of our life depends on being able to lie. The idea that we should go around telling the truth all the time, there are stories about the disasters that leads to. So we have to learn to lie in different ways, lies which the other person knows is a lie, but they're pleased you didn't tell them the truth, and so on and so on. So half-truths and so on and so on. So learning to lie, the art of lying constructively, is one of the basic ones that children have to learn. And I observed this with Lily, because when she was about 3 and I started to interview her, I would ask her, I didn't realize they were embarrassing questions, but it turns out they were mildly, because they were social questions. I'd ask her what she dreamt about, and she would say, oh, I dreamt about this dinosaurs and fairies and things. And then I would say, did you dream about me? Now, she knew I wanted her to dream about me because I wanted to be important in her dreams as well as her life. And so when she was sort of 3.5, she looked at me and said no. No doubt she picked up the disappointment on my face. So when I asked her again when she was 4 or 4.5 whether she'd dreamt about me, she hesitated for about half a second or a second, and her eyes slightly went away, and then she looked back and said, yes. And then I did the same thing, third time, when she really learned how to lie, and she just looked at me and said, yes. And I knew it was no all the time, but basically she'd learned this art. Now what the camera is particularly good at is the hidden, very small signals. This is why I feel it's very sad, or not sad, but a waste of a potential that people like yourself do all these 450 interviews or whatever you've done with philosophers by either email or a tape recording. The British Museum has done all these very long interviews with people, and they use tape recordings. Now, the voice, human voice, only captures about 1/3 of what we're communicating, because the rest is the sound. I mean, the sound combined with just the eye movement or the movement of the lips, leaning forward, leaning back, all that. I mean, the English, it's very important in all cultures, but I was talking to an Italian yesterday, and we got onto the subject of how you speak Italian to an Italian, and I was repeating one of Ernest's, my favorite things from Ernest Gellner, where I asked him how he could speak so many languages, and he said, Alan, the trick is you don't have to learn the language, you have to learn how to present it to them. So when you are in Italy, if you speak like this and you speak in English about it, and you say, Giovanni, how are you? And you wave your arms around, you speak with they'll understand you. It's the body language, and in most cultures, there's much more of the waving of the arms. And my friend there was saying, you can have a whole conversation in Italy without saying a word. You don't need to. So my interviews are filmed interviews. And once you take away the film, although, we're publishing them as books as well, and they're very, very interesting as books, but there is the added dimension in the film. So social media, I love in a way. I mean, I'm not a Facebooker, but, YouTube and the rest, because it gives me a chance to use this material I've gathered. So if you join all forms of human communication, it's fun to explore all of them, because each is strong in one way and weak in another.